Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. So, Ruchi, you're from where? I think you did not attend last two classes, right?
नो सर, एक्चुअली मैं नहीं जान रही थी।
Sorry?
मुझे नहीं पता था इसका। मेरा
अच्छा,
ईमेल लेट से आया। जी।
आप कहाँ से हैं?
मैं दिल्ली से ही हूँ।
अच्छा, अच्छा, ठीक है, ठीक है।
जी।
तो आपका बैकग्राउंड थोड़ा मुझे बताएंगे आप? ये
यस सर, आई एम हाउसवाइफ, मैरिड गर्ल।
okay,
जी।
and you have done your graduation in
इंग्लिश,
okay,
फ्रॉम
you have
बिहार।
done okay, 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 Ruchi.
यस सर।
Okay, Ruchi, I have finished actually new literatures in English. I have finished the introduction part in two classes. Today, I will
ओके सर,
start
ओके।
a novel that is a grain of wheat.
ओके सर, ओके।
Okay, okay.
ओके सर।
So, coming to the grain of wheat, you see, introducing the author. Um, the author. One minute. Yeah. So a grain of wheat is written by Gugiwa Thiango. So Gugiwa Thiango, to know about the author, Gugiwa Thiango was born in and baptized, James Gugi in British-controlled Kenya in 1938. And Gugi and his family were members of the Jikui, the largest ethnic group in Kenya. So, even from his early childhood, Gugi's life was framed by the Kenyan struggle against the British. So, his family was, you know, mm, his family was involved in the Mau Mau freedom fighting movement, and one of his brothers was a freedom fighter, the home guard who tortured his mother, and Goki's deaf brother was shot in back by a British soldier. So Googie began writing very early at the age of 24, premiered a play he had written for the African Writers Conference. And his first novel, Weep Not Child, was published in 1964, the first English language novel to be published by an East African writer. After completing a BA in English at Makerere University, around the same time, Googie traveled to England to work on a MA at Leeds, but he did not, complete his studies since his energy was, you know, intended devoted to the writing of a grain of wheat. Okay, so you find um, So, The Grain of Wheat was published in 1967, and A Grain of Wheat marked a turning point for Googie, after which he became a Fanonist Marxist, rejected Christianity, began writing only in Jikui, and then translating his story into English, and legally changed his name Gugi Wa Thiango, rejecting James Gugi as a missionary construction. So Gugi abandoned his MA and returned to Kenya. He did not continue that, taking a position as a literature professor in the University of Nairobi. And during the time, Googie writing became more, blatantly political, criticizing the Kenya's, newly independent government, and you know, earning the ire of Jomo Kenyatta, a man who Googie had praised in a grain of wheat. So you find in 1977, Buki was imprisoned by the Zomo Kenyatta's successors, and in prison, Gugi wrote his first entirely Jikui novel, The Devil and the Cross. That is a translation. So you find that in prison, Googie and on and he wrote this, on prison toilet papers. So following his release, Googie and his family were exiled from Kenya, and he continued to write, publishing books, essays at the late 2012. Um, and teach as a visiting professor at various universities around Europe and America, including Yale, uh, you know, um, Beirut University in Germany, and New York University. Boogie also revisited the East Africa in 2004, but never moved back to his home country. So, which home country? Ruchi? Ruchi, can you hear me? Okay, so let's continue. So, talking about the historical context of this novel, a grain of wheat is set in 4 days preceding Kenyans' independence in December 1963. But the author recalls events as far back as British settlement in Kenya in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And when the British, occupiers forced tribal groups of their, land, making them, squatters, and often, using them as a forced labor to propel their expansion across Kenya. So, you find most significant to the story, however, is the Mau Mau uprising, also known as the emergency, which Googie own family took part in. Just a minute. Yeah, so I was talking about then what happened is during that period of time, uh, you find um, the family also, got involved with that. The Mao Mao, um, yeah, and you find, just a minute. Oh, yeah. So the Mau Mau uprising began in 1952 as a coalition of Jikui, Meru, and Embu people of Kenya who waged war on the British colonial forces, including both British army soldiers as well as Jikui, who chose to side with the British colonizers. And within the first year of the Mau Mau revolution, British authorities imposed a state of emergency, leading to mass arrest and detention of suspected Mau Mau leaders and sympathizers, including Jomo Kenyatta. And this pressure drove the remaining Mau Mau freedom fighters into the forest, where they adopted guerrilla tactics to harass and terrorize British forces who were far more heavily armed and well supplied. And although the Mau Mau primary leader, Dedan Kimathi, was captured in 1956, signaling a formal defeat, various factions of Mau Mau fighters continued to wage their local wars against the British, and all the way until independence, playing a significant role in forcing the British to cede the control of Kenya back to the Kenyan people. So you find a grain of wheat. Googie as literature played a very formative role in the development of African literature distributed to a global audience, and as well as chronicling East African struggle against the British colonialism. So Buki himself was a very a close contemporary of Chinua Achebe. And Chinua Achebe, you must be knowing the famous author of Things Fall Apart. So, and was widely, considered the greatest masterpiece of African literature, which describes, life in a very pre-colonial Nigeria and British arrival in the 19th century. Another notable contemporary includes Nigerian playwrights uh, Soyinka. Wole Soyinka, whose plays chronicling and criticizing both the colonial rule and the independent Nigerian government, and we find the most famous of which is the Death and the King's Horseman, which earned him imprisonment and exile from Nigeria. But also, you find the 1986 Nobel Prize in Literature. A third important, contemporary is Tanzanian post-colonial author Abdul Razak Gurnaha, author of Paradise, and which novel is that sought to counter dominant Western margins of Africa, which were propagated by Joseph Conrad in famous Heart of Darkness. Which are you getting me? Hello, Ruchi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
this. Okay. Okay. So some facts about a grain of wheat. This was written during 1964 to 66, and it was written at Leeds University, which is present in England. And it took around 2 years, and later it was published in 1967. And you find it is a post-colonial African, period, and this is a very historical novel, and the setting is at Kenya, and we find the climax is Mugo admits to his whole village that he and not Karanja betrayed Kihika to the British. And we find the antagonist is Karanja and John Thompson. And this is particularly written at a third person's point of view. Okay, am I clear? Okay. So if you see, you will find 14 chapters are there. So I will introduce you to the characters first. Okay. So coming to the first character, the primary, you can say the protagonist. The primary protagonist is Mugo, who's the primary protagonist at, you know, and a villager of Thabai. And Mugo's, parents die when he is young, leaving him, destitute and in care of an alcoholic aunt who, abuses and demeans him throughout his childhood. So as an adult, Mugo is, isolated and alone, and purposefully you find keeping himself detached from the world around him, the struggle of his, village. So embodying the natural desires to be, independent and free of the problems of our own one's community. However, despite Muko's wish to be alone and unbothered, he is drawn into the movement when Kihika comes to him for shelter from the British. Okay. So another Muko does not wish to be involved or help, even to help, but he is too passive and indecisive to resist, and afterwards becomes a key figure amongst his people and symbol of resistance against the British. And even though he secretly betrays Kihika to his death. So this disconnect between Mogo perceived the heroism and of his, you know, secretly betrays Kihika to his death. So you find that the dissonance between Mugo perceived a heroism and his secret guilt over his treachery becomes a key aspect of his character. So, despite his, reticence and weakness. The villagers insist on making him, their hero, and his status within the community grows until he has been made into a, he has been placed into a mythical character. Okay, are you getting me, Ruchi? So you find, although Mugo is responsible for the heroic Kihika's death, and the villagers are so moved by his bravery uh, to sacrifice, everything for the sake of the truth. They are, venerate him as a hero once more. But however, you find Mugo is still, executed privately and with dignity. And his confession and death, Mugo is demeaned of his crime and demonstrating the redemption that may be found, through through owing one's guilt and willing, accepting the punishment as well by accepting one's responsibility to the community in spite, of their personal desires. Okay, so this is the primary protagonist, that is Mungo. The next character is Kihika. So you see, Kihika is the brother of Mumbi and yeah. So though, already, dead in the book's present storyline, you find Kihika is the great hero of Jikubi and a leader of the Mau Mau freedom fighters. So you find, in contrast to the generally passive and indecisive male characters in the story, Kika is assured of his destiny, even as a child, knowing that his role is, to fight the evil rule of the British and, give his life as a sacrifice for his people if necessary. So Kihika is, driven by the stories of the Bible and his responsibilities. Just a minute, please hold. Would you please hold on? Huh? Yeah. So what I was telling is, um, Kihika is assured of his destiny even as a child, knowing that his role is to fight the evil rule of British, and give his life as a sacrifice for the people if necessary. But you find Kihika is driven by the stories of the Bible and his responsibilities to his community, modeling, the noble sacrifice which is required to oneself for the sake of others, especially in time of great historical struggle, even recognizing himself as possible the Christ figure in his leadership and sacrifice. So you find that in the depiction of colonialism, Kihika stands opposite to John Thompson, representing the moral, struggle for freedom from oppression, and even at the cost of bloodshed. So, Kihika's belief about sacrifice inevitably comes to Frutian, as he is betrayed by, Mugo, captured as executed for his leadership of the freedom fighters and his, assassination of the notorious Thomas Robson. But however, you find in his death, Kihika becomes an icon of the resistance for his people, and is, the grain of wheat, which is referred to in the title, who, by his death, which brings, new life into the world. Then we have the next character. The next character is um, Chikonyo. Jikonyo is, is Mumbi's husband, and Vangary's only son. So Jikonyo, spends his early years as a poor carpenter, supporting himself and his mother, who were abandoned by his father. Although you find he is very shy, Jikonyo falls in love with Mumbi, and she with him also. It was two-sided, and for a few months he's, deliriously happy. But however, you see, this comes to an end when you find he's arrested and taken to, detention of suspension of having sworn the oath, and, conspired with the Mao Mao, which he did. But although you find Jikonyo remains firm for the first few months of his detention, the passage of time, wears him down and eliminates any noble thoughts of freedom or national suffrage, and driven by a vain hope to be, released early, and return to Mumbai. Jikonyo confesses the oath, betraying his country and shaming himself. And Jikonyo secretly, carries these guilt and shame with him for the rest of the story. Because becoming um, becoming a vessel through which to explore the dark effects of burden of guilt. So you find when Jikunyo is released from the detention, he returns home to find Mumbai and has had a boy by Karancha. So you find the rival of his youth is Karanja, and rather you can say than ask, Mumbai what happened. Jikonyo immediately turns to rage, which he keeps within himself for years, furthering him his suffering. And although Jikonyo becomes a wealthy merchant, his relationship with Mumbai and his own, self-loathing continue to fester until, um, he beats her, causing them to become, estranged from each other. So, although Jikonyo and Mumbi never completely reconcile in this story, Muko's sacrifice and bravery, touches Jikonyo, so deeply that he realizes that he too must, own his guilt and shame. And he takes, the first step towards admitting his wrongs and reconciling with his wife, thus, demonstrating the redemptive power of honest confession. Okay, I hope I'm clear with the characters, Ruchi. Ruchi, are you getting?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next character in this is Karanja. So you find Karanja is the 1 minute. Yeah. So Karanja, you find is the story's primary antagonist, and though you find not in a very strictly villain's role, you find Karanja is a villager of Thabai and works for John Thompson. So you find in his youth, Karanja is is friends with Jikonyo and Kika, and is in love with Mumbai, though she rejects him in favor of Jikonyo. But however, after the emergency, as his friends are swearing the oath and joining the Mao Mao, or being arrested and taken to detention, Karanja instead joins the British colonial force, betraying his country to save himself and remain near Mumbai. And thus you find representing the commitment to self-interest at the expense of all one's community. Karanja believes in the power of white man's technology and weaponry and put himself as close to it as possible. So you find although this gives him the appearance of power which he exalts in, Karanja is truly a coward and frightened of both white people and his own countrymen. Mm. Hello, Ruchi, are you there? Ruchi, hello. Hello, Ruchi. Yeah. Yeah, I was talking about. So you find, he acts very um, ruthlessly towards his fellow Jiku Yu, and enjoys, exerting power over them and inflicting pain. So throughout this time, Karanja remains obsessed with Mumbi and even uses his position to take advantage of her and impregnate her, though he hates himself for doing so afterwards. So if and ultimately Karamja's allegiance to the white man's power turns out to be a fool's gamble when Kenya achieves its independence, and John Thompson and company leaves the country. Karanja's power leaves with them, and so you find Karanja is depicted as irredeemable after his total betrayal of his people over the course of a decade, humiliated and firmly rejected by Mumbai for all time. And Karanja exiles himself to wander alone without power or community, with a very wretched figure. And Karanja is detestable character and pathetic fate, which provides a strong argument against forsaking one's community for the sake of personal gain. So you find, so today I will discuss the last character for today, will be Mumbi, and then we will go to the other characters tomorrow. Okay, Ruchi?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah, I will tell you right now about Mumbi. So
Okay, okay.
Mumbi is Jikonyo's wife, and one Jiku and Bugwa's daughter, Kihika's and Kariwiki's sister. So you find Mumbai is a villager of Thabai, and the single main character that remains in the village, while everyone else is either fighting in the forest or arrested and in detention. So you find, as a woman, Mumbai is also a very strong main character in the story, demonstrating the power of women and their abilities to affect events and succeed where men have failed. And you find, after marrying Jikonyo, Mumbi is afraid that He will go to the forest to fight with the Mau Mau, but resolves that she will fight alongside him in spite of her fear. After her husband is arrested, we find Mumbi helps to care for her mother-in-law, Wangri, and does her part in rebuilding the village of Thabai after it is burned down. So you find although she resists Karanja's advances for the 6 years Jikonyo is detained, she's so dispirited and weakened by the end that she allows him to take advantage of her, eventually giving birth to Karanja's child. And although she loves her child, this betrayal of Jikonyo becomes a great burden for her to carry. So, however, you find Mumbai also plays a critical role in Mugo's character, the development of the character, and in her willingness to sit and share her life story with Mugo, as well as her courage, to confide her own failure to him. Mumbai, brings to penetrate Mugo's thick wall of detachment and eventually inspires him to tell the truth about the betrayal of Kihika. Thus, you find Mumbai is not only the strongest but one of the most vital character in the story. Moving from moving Mugo, the protagonist, from a state of detachment from his community to the state of engagement with it. However, it is brief. So this is all about Mumbai. You find Mumbai was a very strong woman. So the rest characters and to the mm, and the mm, the plot I will tell you in the next class. That is tomorrow. Tomorrow, okay? Ruchi,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Okay, sir.
Hmm?
Okay, sir.
Will you be regular?
Yes, sir.
I heard. Will you be regularly attending the classes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Mm,
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
okay. Okay.